uncertain and when answers aren't clear, let us be still and know that you are God. Is there anything in your world recently that has seemed uncertain? Are there any questions that you don't have clear answers to? What is the Bible's prescription for such times of anxiety and confusion? Be still and know. The Bible's only remedy for you as you live in the reality of today's world is quiet communion with God. Why? What does being still and knowing that He is God have to do with anything? How can that be the answer for such diverse problems as unemployment and civil war and regional storm damage? How can a spiritual reality impact everything? My financial problems, or my physical needs, or my emotional issues. It impacts everything because it is everything. Knowing that He is God is everything. And knowing that He is God only happens when we are still. Because we are only able to immerse ourselves in the reality of His sovereignty when we cease our perpetual efforts to fix our own problems in our own way and instead look to Him for help. And what we remember, hopefully, in those quiet moments is that He knows. And what He knows is us. He knows us, and He knows everything. One of the things in life that causes us so much angst is that we don't know how things are going to turn out. We don't know what's going to happen to us next. We don't know the future, but God does. He reads the future just as if He took a book off the library shelf and began reading it. He sees and understands our lives from a very different perspective than we do. And that places Him in the unique position of being such a comfort and a help to us. If we will be still and know that He is who He says He is. In Matthew 24, where our gospel reading for today comes from, Jesus was talking to His disciples about a time of unrest and persecution that was going to come in the future, both near future and far future. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the very beginning of this conversation. It kind of goes on for a while. But we looked at the very beginning where the disciples asked Jesus 3 questions. When will these things happen? That is, where Jesus had said that not one stone from the temple would be left on another. So the destruction of the temple, when would that happen? Then they asked, what will be the sign of your coming? That is, when Jesus returns at His second coming. And what will be the sign of the end of the age? That is the end of the world. These are the questions that were put to Jesus at the beginning of Matthew 24. And it seems kind of strange to think that He would have only answered the first question and ignored the last 2. Although there are some scholars who say that this chapter of the Bible only pertains to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. But we know that Jesus didn't return in 70 AD. And we also know the world didn't end in 70 AD. That's where we are. In fact, the Apostle John hadn't even written the book Revelation, which is all about the second coming of Christ and the end of the world, until some 20 years after the destruction of Jerusalem. So Jesus has had these 3 questions put to Him, and He has been talking to His disciples about some of the unpleasant things the Jews were going to face leading up to the attack of the Romans in 70 AD. But then he sort of uses that discussion of persecution and trouble as a springboard to talk about a time of trouble that would come upon the whole world at the very end, right before his second coming. And the thing that really got my attention as I was looking through this passage was verse 15. Jesus said, "The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing in the holy place." And I love that little aside thrown in there, then presumably by Matthew. Reader, pay attention. And so when I was looking at this, I thought, well, okay, let me go back to Daniel and have a little look there at what Matthew is referring to. And I sort of fell down a Daniel rabbit hole as I was researching and writing this. Because I went back to the prophet Daniel, and I was just amazed all over again at the detailed history that exists in Daniel. Although at the time it was given, it wasn't history, it was future. Daniel was living in the Babylonian Empire, and God communicated to him the entire future of world empires to come, all the way down through and even beyond the Roman Empire, hundreds of years before all those events occurred. In Daniel 7, God even correctly predicted that the civil authority of the Pope, that is the domination of the state by the church, would last for 1,260 years. That's a very specific amount of time. And it did exactly that. From 538 AD, when Emperor Justinian granted civil authority to the Pope, until 1798 AD, when Napoleon took it away because he kidnapped the Pope, which was quite a nervy thing to do. And at that time, it looked like Rome's civil authority was dead and gone. But it was revived in 1929 when Italy established Vatican City as an independent civil state and again recognized the sovereignty of the Pope. That event was also predicted in Bible prophecy. In fact, there are examples of this kind of knowing of future events all over the place in Scripture. When the Israelites first entered the Promised Land and defeated the city of Jericho, do you remember that God warned in a prophecy that anyone who tried to rebuild the city of Jericho would do so at the cost of the lives of their oldest and youngest son? More than 600 years later, when a man named Kyle rebuilt the city, he sacrificed his oldest son when he laid its foundations. And he sacrificed his youngest son when he set up its gates. That's really messed up. But God knew it was coming hundreds of years in advance. In 2 Kings, we read about good King Joshua. There weren't many good kings in Israel's history, you know. But Joshua was one of the good ones. Josiah, not reading my notes right. Josiah was one of the good ones. And in chapter 23 of 2 Kings, it says that Josiah tore down the altars that the kings of Judah had built on the palace roof above the upper room of Ahaz. These were bad altars, evil altars. He defiled the altar of Topheth in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so no one could ever again use it to sacrifice a son or daughter in the fire as an offering to Molech, because the Israelites were doing that. And that wasn't all. Once Josiah got started, he went off on an altar-desecrating rampage. The king also tore down the altar at Bethel, the pagan shrine that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had made when he caused Israel to sin. He burned down the shrine and ground it to dust, and he burned the Asherah pole. Then Josiah turned around and noticed several tombs in the side of the hill. He ordered that the bones be brought out, and he burned them on the altar at Bethel to desecrate it. Now get this. This happened just as the Lord had promised through the man of God when Jeroboam stood beside the altar at the festival, when he set up the altar in the first place. Do you remember that story? The story from 1 Kings 13 of the prophet who'd been told by God to go deliver a prophecy and then go straight home. Remember that? And he did. He went and he delivered the prophecy. Oh, but then he got intercepted by that older prophet who lied. Remember, he said, I'm a prophet of God too, and you can come home to dinner with me because God said so. And the younger prophet said, okay. And when he did just that, instead of obeying what God had told him, he died on the way home. This was the altar from that story. This was the altar that the young prophet had been sent to prophesy against. And look at what God had said was going to happen to that altar 300 years before it happened. By the word of the Lord, a man of God came from Judah to Bethel, just as King Jeroboam was standing by the altar to make an offering. By the word of the Lord, he cried out against the altar, Altar! Altar! This is what the Lord says. A son named what? Josiah will be born to the house of David. On you he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who make offerings here, and human bones will be burned on you. Wow! 3 centuries before Josiah tore down the altar and burned bones on it, God said a man named Josiah was going to tear down this altar and burn bones on it. After the altar had been desecrated, 2 Kings 23 says this, Then Josiah turned and looked up at the tomb of the man of God who had predicted these things. What's that monument over there? Josiah asked. And the people of the town told him, It's the tomb of the man of God who came from Judah and predicted the very things that you have just done to the altar at Bethel. Josiah replied, Leave it alone, don't disturb his bones. So they did not burn his bones or those of the old lying prophet from Samaria. Did you follow that? That's wild. Hundreds of years before this happened, God told his prophet not only that the altar would be destroyed, but exactly who would do it. He knew all about Josiah long before Josiah's father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, or great-great-great-grandfather were on the scene. To put that in perspective, it would be like God announcing that Ken and Joyce Wilson were going to have a baby girl named Kelley, born in the fall of 1977 in Long Beach, California, shortly after the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock. Long before there was a Long Beach, a California, or a Ken and Joyce Wilson. There's no doubt that God clearly sees the future. He knows everything. Time and time again, he has revealed to us that he knows us so well that he can predict with sometimes unfortunate accuracy exactly what we will do. I wonder if God ever wishes he was wrong. I can't imagine how it must make him feel to be able to read the evil in our future like an open book. On the other hand, it's also his ability to see and know the future that gives us great hope. See, we think knowing the future would give us peace. But really, it's only knowing God that will give us peace. We are asked to know, but we are asked to be still and know. We don't have to know everything about our future. We only need to know the one who does. And since he has predicted all the evil with 100% accuracy, we have no reason to doubt that he's wrong about the fact that one day sin and suffering will be over. And there will be a new heaven and a new earth. And there will be no more tears or crying or death or sadness. Since he's been so accurate about all the terrible things that have come to pass, I think we can be assured that the overwhelming joy he's prophesied will also come, never to pass. And as we wait for it to come, in the meantime, I find it immensely comforting to know that God isn't surprised by anything. Whatever is headed my way today, or tomorrow, or next year, he already knows about it. He's not surprised by any evil that comes to us in this life, and he's also not surprised by any evil that we may perpetuate in this life. Long before we know what's going on, he has seen the path we're on, and he's prepared to help us deal with it. Whether it be the fallout of suffering or the consequences of bad decisions. God knows everything. He knows the future. He knows your future. And that means he knows what's going to happen to you before you do. He has seen this day and all the things it holds. And he is prepared to share it with you. If it holds pleasant things, he's prepared to rejoice with you. And if it holds unpleasant things, he is prepared to suffer with you. No matter what we encounter, good or bad, he is with us. He will never leave us. And in the midst of it all, he offers us the enduring biblical prescription for peace. Be still